Hey everybody, Kenny here. So, as you can tell, this is obviously a very different build video than what I did for all my other characters. And the reason for that is that around a little less than a week ago from the time of this recording, my Premiere Pro just stopped being able to import videos properly. So every time I tried to import a video, the entire software just goes into a state where I can't control anything. So for the last three to 4 days, I've been using DaVinci Resolve. But unfortunately, the only reason why I was able to do the build videos for these four the way I did is because I've spent the last 2 years working with Premiere Pro. So I have a fair amount of understanding of how that software works, but I don't have the competency with DaVinci to make that kind of video. I wasted an entire day just working on the audio before I decided that, I wasted a full day to make worse audio than what I've been doing in Premiere. So this is just going to be just a standard build video the way I do it for Path of Exile, just because I just don't have the skill set to do something more interesting using Premiere Pro. The whole idea behind this build is that this is a melee fighter that uses shadow clones to do a lot of their wet work. So first I'm going to show the build in action, and then I'll go into the details on how it works.
Not happening. Not happening.
Since I'm not going for cinematic flare, let me turn the damage numbers back on. All right. That bug is still there. Okay.
Not happening. Not happening. Not happening. Not happening. Not happening. Not happening.
Okay, so what was going on and how does that work, right? First off, this build is using the Gelcor's Blast Knife, which is a unique that turns the skill Detonating Arrow into a melee attack instead of being... You can see that the skill itself says it requires a bow, but that dagger makes it that it no longer requires a bow and instead scales off of melee damage instead of bow damage. So even though this is technically a marksman build for the reason that we need to be a marksman in order to gain access to Detonating Arrow, aside from that, there is no investment at all in marksman. This is entirely a rogue and blade dancer build. So gear-wise, aside from the gel cores, I'm using a Chris knife because Chris knives implicitly have a very large critical strike damage multiplier. And I crafted I'm pretty sure it's tier 5. Yeah, tier 5 melee critical strike chance, as well as tier 5 melee fire damage. The fire damage isn't really a big thing. I just needed some additional damage, and this one happened to have some melee fire damage on it. Because if we look at our stats here, we can see that we don't really have a lot of increased damage. Like, I didn't invest in increased damage for this build. But if the damage numbers were working, then you would have seen that I'm still doing very good damage. You know, it's very nice damage. It's just that I don't have high investment into damage itself. The reason for that is that our critical strike multiplier is like doing the majority of the work here. And even though we don't have like a huge chance to crit, like we're looking at 24% base chance with 37% melee. Like, it's not a huge chance to crit, but it's high enough that we're critting fairly often. And because we're critting fairly often, we have this very large critical strike multiplier that's really doing a lot of work for our damage. And then in terms of our regular gear, like, we're just trying to stack as much dexterity as possible. I'm wearing this Last Bear's Lament just because it gives a very large amount of void resistance as well as endurance threshold. So our endurance threshold is 230. Base endurance threshold is 20% of whatever your maximum health is. So in this case, that would be like 128 for our endurance threshold. So like, we're over 100 points over our base endurance threshold because of the equipment that I have going here. So these here, these coral rings give us increased health regen, as well as, I invested as much as I could into dexterity, endurance, and resistances as I could. Then my belt, more health regen, a little more resistance. Gloves, more dexterity, more regen. These particular gloves have implicit necrotic resistance on them. Our boots, more dexterity. Our relic, more critical strike multiplier. Fortunately, I wasn't really able to get much dexterity. I really only want to get 1 point of dexterity on there before running out of fortune potential. Eventually, I want to get another relic that gives me some more leeway to get more critical strike multiplier and dexterity, but this is what I have going for now. And then, our amulet, critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, dodge rating, and resistances. So, just trying to even out my build as much as I could through the gear. Then with our idols, we're looking at a grand idol with increased area for Detonating Arrow, increased armor shred, increased critical strike chance per dagger equipped, increased damage while wielding a dagger. Then our small idols are for extra resistances and some extra health regen. And then our humble idols are for more resistances and stats. Passive wise, for Rogue, we took 1 point in Swift Assassin just to open up access to lethal cadence. So we have the maximum damage buff whenever we deal our third melee hit. And only 1 point into dodge and parry, just to help us get to that 20 threshold. So that way we had access to the major mastery. Then 8 points in steady hand for the extra dexterity and health. Twin blade, so we can dual wield swords and daggers in our offhand. 4 points in the sapping strike, so that when we use a skill that doesn't cost mana, we gain back health and mana. That's the reason why we're using Flurry in this build. Then blade dancer, full into cloak of shadow, so we get all the dexterity. We have a decent glancing blow chance. We got shroud of dusk. And we only invested 1 point here and went full points into Veil of Night, because Veil of Night makes it that, so with Shroud of Dusk, this only has a chance to occur when you are hit, whereas Veil of Night makes it that you have a chance of gaining Dusk Shroud when you hit, which makes it, obviously, like, you're going to be gaining it much more regularly with this than you are with this. That's why I just went full ranks into Veil of Night. And also gives us more melee attack speed, which is nice. Then full into once, which gives us just flat damage with our melee attacks and increased dodge rating when we hit. pull into skill synthesis, which gives us increased health gain each time that a shadow is created, and makes it that our shadows do increased damage, which is very good for us because we are fully invested into dealing damage using our shadows. And then we just fully invested in this right here, so this gives us flow, which makes it that whenever we use a unique skill, we increase the damage of getting so in this case, a unique skills required is 4, which means that, so if you use Flurry, Detonating Arrow, Shadow Cascade, and Smoke Bomb, then you would get this 200% increased damage bonus by consuming the flow stacks, which can only be done when you reach the unique skill required thing you see right there. But we went into this one here, which gives us the increased crit chance and increased bleed chance, but increases the number of skills required in order to trigger flow up to 5 skills instead of 4 skills, which is another reason why we're using Flurry in this build. Because technically, like Flurry, I'm really only using it as an opener. Like I run into a group, you'll see me use it one time. Like if you go back to the gameplay showcase there, you would see, I would open up with a Flurry, and then I would just hold down my Detonating Arrow, Smoke Bomb, and Shift keys. I'll just hold all 3 down at the same time and just move my mouse around so that, I'd be using each of those as they came off cooldown, or in the case of Detonating Arrow, when the other 2 were sitting on cooldown. And because when I use my Shift, I'm also using Shadow Cascade. That's why you don't see me holding down Shadow Cascade, because Shadow Cascade is only happening when I'm using Shift, which is only happening it's usually only happening while there are shadow clones around, because the Shift skill is what's executing our Shadow Cascade, and therefore is generally what the skill that is going to be consuming our flow, meaning that it's got a guaranteed chance to crit, and it is dealing a massive amount of increased damage. So every time you see that's why anytime you saw the little spinning whirlwind thing happen, anything around it would die, because it's basically guaranteed chance to crit and is doing massive amounts of damage, even though I'm not really invested into damage. Then with Rhythm, whenever you gain a chance of flow, you gain a buff that increases your attack speed. So that's why you see me attacking so fast. And then Tempo is just another buff on top of flow that makes it that whenever you generate or consume flow, you gain increased melee damage and crit multiplier for generating or consuming flow. So that's why even though I'm not invested in damage really, when it comes to my gear or my skill choices, I'm still doing massive amounts of damage just because of this right here. This is 90% of our damage comes from this. Then skill wise, obviously, we're using Flurry. The investment that I made for Flurry is just that we have some increased damage, we have some increased crit chance, we have some increased crit multiplier. Then if we happen to crit while using Flurry, then we heal. And since we have a decent chance to crit, if I notice that my health is getting low, then I'll just Flurry, because as I mentioned in Rogue, I invested in this right here. So we're getting back health, just regular health, every time Flurry is hitting, because Flurry doesn't cost anything. And then every time it crits, it's healing us additionally. Then down in this area, making it that the 3rd strike in our Flurry deals more damage, and then occasionally there'll be a little force blast that flies out with the 3rd strike, which that doesn't really matter, right? It's just extra for being extra, and then some extra attack speed. So Flurry isn't a big part of our damage. You can see it does a lot of damage anyway, but it isn't really a big part of our damage. It's just really for like teaming up with the other skills to get our flow. And in Detonating Arrow, the way I invested here was that I got quick detonation, so it has increased crit chance or reduced arming time, and then weak spot, so that way it has a bigger crit multiplier and gives a critical vulnerability chance. You can see that critical vulnerability adds additional chance to crit, meaning that again you're debuffing the enemy to make it that they're more susceptible to being crit, because it not only increases your chance to crit but also reduces their critical chance avoidance. So that's a very nice one for if you want to make sure you're getting the most damage possible from critting. And then over here, like I have this little shock chance thing, but the shock doesn't really matter. We're really only here for the Sucker Punch Arrow. And the Sucker Punch Arrow, and here's the thing, I don't actually know this works. I think this works. I've never actually been able to confirm that this, because since we're like the animation for this skill is just this. We're just seeing that like we're like glowing with with a kind of like lightning. Since that's the only visual indicator when you're using that skill with Jokor's dagger. If there is an additional arrow that's being plunged into the enemy when we're using that, I have no way of telling. Yeah, because we're hitting in melee. So like if we were using this at range, we would see an additional arrow, fly out most likely. But I don't know. Like it's this is here because if that's working, then that's part of the reason why enemies tend to just instantly die whenever I use this skill. Because if we look at the damage that it says it does, according to this, it doesn't deal damage at all. 120 damage is what it's saying it's doing. But but if you go back and watch any time that I hit something with this, you'll see an entire giant group of enemies will just die. They just instantly die anytime I use this skill because it does a massive amount of damage. Because I guess this doesn't count the explosion for some reason. Like I said, it only counts the hit, and everything we're doing here is based on is making it the explosion is bigger. So we have maximum increase to the explosion area at one point in here just to get over there, but investing in this means that you consume an amount of your mana. So there's the regular skill cost of this, plus you'll consume 5% of your mana. On top of that, we don't have a lot of mana. You only have 81 mana. If I had 300 mana or something, I would probably fully invest in this, because the more mana you have, the more increased damage. But with 81 mana, like that, 5%, isn't really much. So that's why I only have the 1 point there. Then fully invested in well crafted for the increased explosion damage and the increased explosion area. And then rapid detonation, which means that when we hit an enemy with Detonating Arrow, if we do it again, then it if we do any kind of hit after that, then it just explodes right away. Because generally it's this is a time thing. It arms. There we go. like the skill, it arms and then it explodes. But but the way we're using it, it's always just exploding immediately. So it just does tremendous amounts of damage, despite the fact that the tooltip itself doesn't say we're doing any damage at all. Yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of things that they need to fix as far as the tooltips go. Because the Sucker Punch Arrow, this doesn't tell you anything about the Sucker Punch Arrow, and you don't actually get to see what is it that a Sucker Punch Arrow is doing. A lot of times you'll get a little extra tooltip that'll tell you what the extra skill is. So in this case, we know that that's what a lightning tendril does. Okay, lightning tendril does that much damage per second if you were to invest in Arcing Blast. So we know that. But if you look at Arcing Blast itself, you can't see what lightning tendril does. So if there's no modifier on the skill that has an additional thing like that, then you don't get to see what the actual skill does. Yeah, so hopefully they fix that eventually. And then for Shadow Cascade, this is a very large amount of our damage comes from Shadow Cascade. So you can see that Shadow Cascade does a decent amount of damage itself. The way I've invested in it is that it has an armor shred chance. It deals more damage, but doesn't scale with attack speed. And then we have Flow State, which makes it that it deals more damage per dagger that we're wielding. And then I got Onslaught so that it refunds some of its damage if a shadow was summoned, I suppose, like when the skill was triggered. And down this way, I increased the area that the Shadow Cascade can hit in. That's why those those little bins are so big. Then I increased the Shadow Cascade's base crit chance. Increased the crit multiplier. So so multipliers and top multipliers for how much damage that does, which is why when Shadow Cascade hits, it nukes. And then Gloomstalker, which makes it that anytime we kill with Shadow Cascade, we create more shadows that can then be further detonated. But this is more like if you're in a situation where like things aren't dying immediately, then that's when this is good. So I mean, well, when I say that, I mean when you get in a situation where like there's a huge group of enemies, and and some die but the others don't, then like this would come in handy because then you can just hit it, hit your shift to execute all of your existing shadows, and then then manually use your Shadow Cascade to actually finish off anything that's still alive if you're in a situation where like you need to think about what's going on, which I generally don't. And obviously like our big like this is as big a part of the build as anything else, because by putting down our smoke bomb, this is how we are generating all of our shadows. So we're investing as much into area as we can get. We're making it that we have increased glancing blow, dodge chance when we have a dusk shroud, which we're getting all the time because we invested into dusk shroud in our passive tree. Fully invested into impending doom so that we have even more area for our smoke bomb, and the growth speed is as high as you can get it. Then lingering fumes, so that the smoke lasts for longer. Only 1 point in smoke blades because we just need to be able to gain access to umbral salt, this is how we are generating our shadows. So while the smoke is active, we are constantly just summoning more shadows. So for the full duration of the smoke bomb, we're just generating shadows the entire time. Which is why the way that I play this is I just hold down my smoke bomb, detonating arrow, and shift keys like the entire time. Like after I attack with Flurry, I just hold those down, and I don't bother to think about like should I use these situationally? No, just use them when they're ready, just at all times. And then shift. I've invested in Unseen Strike. It doesn't really matter. It's just like if it just so happens that you're holding the mouse in a position where you would be shifting through an enemy, then this will do extra damage, and it'll also have a wider range that damage can occur in. You have a higher chance to have this happen. And then also, if you happen to hit something in that range, then you hit them with a Shadow Dagger, which Shadow Dagger is an insanely powerful skill. So we can actually see here. Oh, no, we can't. Can't see it there. Is there another? Let's see. Dagger. No. Okay, so we can't see it here, but if we find the other skill that has Shadow Dagger in it, so just Umbral Strike, so the whole thing is Shadow Dagger. So here we go. So you can see that Shadow Daggers deal a tremendous amount of damage. But the thing is, like, the way that Shadow Daggers work is you have to stack them onto the enemy. But we don't really have a good stacker for that. We're not really invested, because we could invest it into it here also, I believe. Not really. Again, like there's a little bit chance of Shadow Dagger, but like it's a large investment to get there, and you change the functionality of it, and I wouldn't want to do that. But like Shadow Dagger does a very large amount of damage, and you can invest in doing that. But like I only have this here because I had extra points to spend after investing in the stuff that actually makes a difference for our shift, which is that every time we shift, we heal ourselves a little bit. our cooldown and mana efficiency are better because we invested there. Our shifting restores our mana and then stores more mana when we're below half health. We're invulnerable while we're shifting. We gain a movement speed buff after every time we shift. We leave a shadow behind in place whenever we shift, and most importantly, we use Shadow Cascade after shifting. So it's an additional shadow that is teaming up with all the other shadows that we have from our Shadow Bomb in order to use Shadow Cascade, which if, since, as I mentioned, this is usually the skill that is consuming our flow. So you have all of the shadows that are created from our smoke bomb, plus the shadow that was left behind when we shift, plus ourselves using the skill Shadow Cascade, and all of those have a guaranteed chance to crit and massive increase to damage and damage multiplier and critical strike multiplier when they hit. So we're talking like ridiculous amounts of damage from this skill. Just outrageous amounts of damage. Yeah, so that is I call it the Doppelganger build, which would have made more sense if I had I've been able to finish my build video for it in the style of the other ones. It just was not good the way that I had made it in DaVinci. Like I wish I had more skill with that software to have been able to do it as nicely as I was able to do the other ones. But I don't have that skill set yet, and it wasn't good. It was not good. Like I wish it was, but it wasn't. Thanks everybody for stopping by and checking this out. If you are new to Last Epoch, then I have a new player guide that you can find in the description of this video. And a link to all of my other builds should be found there as well. That's going to be it for this one. Make sure everybody stopping by and check me out. Enjoying the tips that I included here, then consider sharing it with your friends. Until next time, stay Victus, Fires and Maris, bye.